It's a wild world we live in. Getting wilder all the time. And the wilder it gets, the more Satan does his level best to keep us completely divided against each other. How many of you really understand that the Bible pushes us to learn, to educate ourselves? Not necessarily the way the world wants us to educate ourselves, but to actually come to an understanding about not only how the world works, but how He works, how God functions in the world, and to allow us to continue to do this. This is constant. Because the reason I ask is because almost everyone that you talk to in the world says that Christians are the dumbest people they've ever met, that they don't know a bleep thing, that they're stupid. Despite the constant accusations of some that believers are ignorant or are against education, I think I know where that comes from. This comes from our politics, which is rather stupid, but that's me saying that. But they say that believers are against education. Anyone who regularly reads the Bible and deeply studies the Word of God understands that He wants His people to be wise. He warns us all against ignorance and the pitfalls of being ignorant. But most especially, and this is where I think the world has their problem, He doesn't want us in ignorance about His Word. Let's go to Drop Anchor, Proverbs, the 4th chapter, the 1st verse. Proverbs, the 4th chapter, the 1st verse, where it says, "Sons, hear the instructions of a father, and listen in order to know understanding. For I give you good teaching. Do not forsake my law. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He also taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom. Get understanding. Forget not, nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her," speaking of wisdom, "and she shall preserve you. Love her, and she shall keep you." Wisdom is the main thing. Get wisdom, and with all you're getting, get understanding. Solomon stressed this point. The Father and Yeshua repeated throughout the Bible, often. This dismissal of believers as anti-education is a ruse. Theoretically, in this world, if you're ignorant, no one has to listen to you. It's a game. Not well played, because most of the folks that are making the argument are the people that are jacking that world up out there, but we'll find out about that as we go through. Note what Moses warns the Israelites in appointing their tribal leaders. Let's go to Deuteronomy, the 1st chapter, the 12th verse. Deuteronomy, the 1st chapter, the 12th verse, where it says, "How can I," speaking of back then, he was kind of the judge for everyone, and it got to be a little bit too much, and there were suggestions made. "How can I by myself bear your pressure and your burden and your strife?" 13. "Give wise and understanding men and those known to your tribes." Known by what? Their wisdom, their knowledge, their ability to tell you, this is how do you do that. Teaching, in other words. "Those known to your tribes, and I will appoint them rulers over you." This refrain of trust and wisdom is constant throughout the entire Bible. Notice that Yahweh points it out again and again, even through Job. Let's go to Job, the 28th chapter, 7th verse. Job, the 28th chapter, the 7th verse, where it says, "There is a path which no bird knows, nor has the vulture's eye caught sight of it. The sons of pride have not walked in it. The lion has not passed by. He puts forth his hand on the flinty places. He overturns the mountains by the roots. He cuts out rivers among the rocks, and his eye sees every precious thing," which means he sees us as well. "He holds back the floods from overflowing." I believe he's holding back something right now out in Yellowstone, but we'll get to that. "He holds back the floods from overflowing, and the hidden thing he brings to light. But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know the price of it, nor is it found in the land of the living." Let's go down to verse 22. Let's stay right there. Let's go to verse 22. "The place of ruin and death, say, we have heard the fame of it with our ears. Elohim understands the way of it, and he knows its place. And he looks to the end of the earth and sees under all the heavens, making a weight for the winds and measuring out the waters by measure. When he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning to thunder, then he saw it and declared it. He prepared it, yea, and searched it out. And to man he said, behold, the fear of Yahweh is wisdom. And to depart from evil is understanding." This concept is so missed in the modern study of the Bible. Only love is mentioned more in the Bible than wisdom or understanding. It would take a solid hour to read through all of the scriptures admonishing man to get wisdom and understanding. There are 379 different ones. And there's a reason for this. Every day that passes by proves it more and more and more. Yet we live in an age that takes a great deal of pride in its level of education, despite the dumb things they do on a daily basis. We live in an age that takes perhaps too much pride in how it has used its learned wisdom to advance the human race. So much so that we don't even realize that there's only one. They hear people constantly that have advanced degrees talking of the race as if there is more than one. But you say that they don't know what they're talking about, they'll impugn your intelligence. You see, we've become so focused on mankind solving its own problems that we've completely forgotten about God in our search for solutions. And we create more and more problems with each new solution. We go back to the same sources of the original problem in order to somehow solve them. And we take on this ad hoc approach to the problems that just completely multiply. They just happen over and over and over again, and we'll figure that out. But it never gets figured out. In other words, mankind takes each problem as a problem unto itself, rather than one part of a system of problems that require complete resolution of each problem as a systemic thing that all of these problems link up together, so why should you try to work with them individually? If you fix one, you may fix the others right along with it. Figure out a systemic way to do this. But we can't do that. Can't do that. We can't do that. We don't believe that these things require systemic solutions for all the problems together. But the best example of this is how medicine deals with individual body parts rather than seeing and treating the human body as a system in which all of its parts work together to produce a whole body living in perfect health. As with the body, this working of each problem alone rather than as part of a system has failed us, as you'll see some of the numbers when we go through. This system has failed us as the problems get worse and worse and may soon be discovered to be unsolvable. Further proof, our financial system is on the edge of collapse. Remember how you used to, when you talked to your parents, they would talk about how you would go out and ask Mama for $1, and Mama would talk about how when she was little, she could get a pop for 10 cents. And now it's $1.50, and if the city gets their way, it'll be $1.80. There's a reason for that, too. Other than the fact that certain people make money on it, but we know that already. But the financial system, as I said, is on the edge of collapse because of inflation. I don't have 3 hours to explain what causes that, but we know it was the banking system that did it, and that's all really you need to know. But look around you and notice most of the trees are dying, bark falling right off of them. Some of them never bloomed when the sun came out and asked them to. It's just getting worse. We've got a caldera just smoking out in Yellowstone, out in Wyoming. That's, for those who haven't figured it out, that's an underground volcano, which is not like it's all coming up at one point and just spews lava in one place. This thing is going across an almost 40 to 50 mile area. And if that thing goes, there is no more Midwest. And the volcano has been smoking for a while. Yeah, I've heard it on the news maybe once or twice. Most people, when you ask, well, what could happen if that thing goes? Every once in a while they'll tell you, but most people say, that thing, it's only supposed to go every 600,000 years. I'm like, who was here to tell us about the last time? Okay. If it was 600,000 years ago, who was there to write the note? Who survived to write the note and say, oh, it only happens every 600,000 years? Don't get me started. Don't get me started. But anyway, this thing is smoking at Yellowstone, and nobody has said a word. Radiation is being detected in the air in the United States, all over. And much of the wildlife in the Pacific Ocean is dead. Not dying, dead. But very little is said about it in the press. We don't want to scare anybody. When they say anything at all, they all have the same line. Oh, we're okay. It's going to be fine. Everything is going to be fine. Because we have the best educational system in the world and have produced the most intelligent scholars in the world, the most intelligent lawyers in the world. So we put our trust in these educated minds to find solutions to all of society's problems. Yet, education in this country has forgotten the beginning of all knowledge and wisdom. And at one time, they had it. Oh, we were told of it. We were told of it right here. Proverbs, the 1st chapter, the 7th verse. Proverbs, the 1st chapter, the 7th verse, where it says, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and forsake not the law of your mother. The warning is a constant refrain throughout the Bible, yet most of the intellectual world scoffs at that knowledge and ridicules anyone who makes a suggestion based upon biblical wisdom or biblical understanding. No matter how much sense the suggestion makes. Oh no. What? Bible? Are you nuts? We can't do that. What, are you superstitious? Understand again. The world is whose? It's Satan's. And it has no use for the solutions of God. Mankind will solve his own problems. Thank you very much. Or so they say. As you've probably figured out, we're at Matrix 4. Education or indoctrination. And that is the question we look into today. Are we being educated, or are we simply victims of menticide? Menticide. Funny, last time we did this, what was that, 11 years ago? The word wasn't in the dictionary. It is now. Has a little bit different usage, and like I said, I think they overthunk it a little bit, but it's in there now. I take no credit for that. I believe it's just something I stumbled upon and hadn't seen it before, but it goes like this. You break the word down. That's usually what I do in almost anything. I just look at the word, then look at the original Greek, Hebrew, English, Latin, whatever it was, and figure out what the word means first, and then go and see what the dictionary says. And usually it's right, or at least close to it. But it is in the dictionary now. Mentis in Latin means the working, functional, mental state of mind. In other words, thinking. Side is self-explanatory. Killing. You've heard the words before, but maybe not in that form, but you probably heard something like homicide. Or maybe you heard suicide. Homicide meaning the killing of another human being. Suicide, killing yourself. Or maybe you heard fratricide. Two people shooting each other simultaneously. Menticide, in this case, is a killing of the mind. Or more specifically, training us to think in a very basic, simple manner, which encourages the methods and things taught and discourages any concept other than the method and information being caught. Let's boil it down to one word. It's called brainwashing. Brainwashing. Many may disagree, but you look around the world at many of the decisions that are made regularly and see that the destructive results prove that somebody wasn't thinking. Yet, no one seems shocked when these things happen. But we see these allegedly educated decisions and wonder, what were they thinking? Oh, the whole thing, it's about to blow up. It's spewing radioactive water. Talking about the Fukushima reactor in Japan. Oh, well, let it keep going. It's got to go somewhere. 5 years ago, it was, we'll stop it up and eventually it'll go away. They forgot to tell us that anything that's radioactive has a life that's a lot longer than ours, maybe 10,000 years or so. Oh, wow, we'll just let this stuff flow we'll outlive it. Not in this stuff. Not in this stuff. This stuff is only put out for 72 years, and in a toxic situation like that, that's going to go down considerably, as we'll see as we go through this. But this was somebody with probably a PhD in some science, some applied science. That I don't think it was being applied scientifically when they made this decision, but they said, it'll be okay. But look at what's happening. The Pacific Ocean is dead. They're pulling up whales and stuff every day. The stuff dies and just washes up on the oceans. Now you can do radiation detection anywhere. I could probably go out there and just turn the thing on. I could probably go out there now remember the old little things you used to try to find, the little things that you used to use to try to find metal with, but they also can detect radiation in the air. Geiger counter. If I took one out there right now, it would do like, I guarantee it. Because the stuff is in the air. They have found it everywhere from Calabasas to Boston. Yet they say that there are no nuclear plants that are leaking in the United States, so where could it possibly be coming from? But Fukushima. And they say that was an educated decision to just let it flow. That's insane. It's insane. But this is the kind of thinking we're dealing with. This is the kind of thinking we're dealing with. But let's not deal too much with specifics, because the general stuff is a lot more interesting. Let's go back to the beginning of the U.S. educational system and start right at the top. Right at the collegiate level. The first college founded in the United States was, anybody? Harvard. It was college then. It was Harvard College. It moved up and became a university later, I guess, when educated people became but we won't go there. It all started at Harvard College, which was founded in 1636 by Puritan Calvinists. What it said in their intro, disciples of early Christian father John Calvin, who believed that, check this out, the Bible teaches plainly that mankind is basically sinful and can only be changed by a baptism, conversion, belief in, and strict obedience to God's law. Whoa, this is Harvard? Yeah, they started off on the right foot. Strict obedience to God's law as taught in the Bible. His sins being covered by God's saving grace. This is Harvard. Then we see the problem. Calvinists who recognized the necessity for training up a clergy if the new Bible Commonwealth, which the early pilgrims hoped this land to become, was to flourish in the wilderness. Now, for clarity, these men were believers. And some of them were actually Sabbath keepers. But this was not true of all who came together to form what became the United States. But many still have these Calvinists in mind when they claim that the country was founded on biblical principles. As far as these men, yes, it was. This was true up to a point. And there were believers at all points leading up to and including the founding fathers, if you will. But the path was not as clear as some would say. Not as faithful as some would have you believe. Since 1620, some 17,000 Puritans had migrated to New England from all points in Europe. And they wanted ministers who were able to expound the scriptures from the original Hebrew. See if you've heard this before. The original Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, as well as to be familiar with the church fathers, the scholastic philosophers and the reformists who had written in Greek and Latin. So this idea that believers are supposed to be stupid, ball it up, throw it away. It's garbage. It's garbage. These men wanted to be able to teach in Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and Latin. That last one, but we'll get there. I heard a Catholic laughing back there. The kind of teachings that Harvard was to provide were spelled out in its precepts and rules as follows. Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider well the main end of his life and studies, to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. And they go to Scripture. Wow. John, the 17th chapter, the 3rd verse. And therefore to lay Christ in the bottom as the only foundation of all found knowledge and learning. Being the first college of learning established in the colonies, it was apparent that the hearts of the Puritans were in the right place concerning God's place in education and their ministries. And then came other colleges. I remember visiting this one years ago when I went to a feast in Williamsburg, Virginia, the College of William and Mary. Had no idea how big it was. Yale came then. Then the College of William and Mary and other institutions of higher learning were established. All were initially concerned with religious studies. But as with all other endeavors of piety, over time, resistance began to creep in. As more immigrants came from Europe, some brought in other philosophies and argued that these philosophies must also be taught. As more Unitarians came in, Unitarian thought was forced into the colleges. Hearing this, it may sound familiar to you, because I'm sure if you've gone to college at all, you've heard this in other contexts. And now from here, you'll see where it started. This was for Yale, by the way. Unitarian thought teaches that man was not only basically good. What? That's kind of flipped from what was said before, am I right? I just want to make sure I'm hearing this right now. Unitarian thought teaches that man was not only basically good, but through education, perfectible. For this reason, social action became the principal mode in which Unitarians practiced their religion. Quit looking over there just because there's a Unitarian church on the corner. Now you'll understand what they believe. You see some of it already. Just drive by there and you can see the signs of it, but let's get into the depths of it so you understand how they got to the point where that flag is flying there. Social action became the principal mode in which Unitarians practiced their religion. What happened to worship? I'll shut up, Ray. They were convinced that evil was caused not by man's sinful nature, but by ignorance, poverty, and social injustice. Thus, by eliminating ignorance through universal public education, which they would administer, they would eliminate poverty and thereby eliminate social injustice. Once this was done, and the happy results were observed by all, the Unitarians would have proven that they were right and the Calvinists were wrong. And God's kingdom would be established by man. By man? And then it gets worse. Then God and Christ would come to administer it. Give me a second. I didn't know whether to cry or grab somebody and choke them. That was crazy. That was crazy. But this is what people believe. If you look at it, you read plaques around here, you'll see some of the same things, the things that are done. I've heard these things from other churches in this tradition that say this, and it's like, you're saying that if you march in the streets, that's more effective than praying in the church? You lost me there. But you didn't lose them. The world believes this, largely. Now, as you can see, both schools were not exactly on point, setting up a system that remains the crux of our problems to this day. And now let's figure out why. You see, among the Calvinists were disciples of George Friedrich Hegel. Hegel was a German philosopher. And in all honesty, Hegel is a strange choice of philosopher for any believer. Why? Because Hegel rejected the theology of the Bible. And believed that everything in the universe is God. You hear that from people that don't know much about it, but will say, like, you hear people, God is in everything. God is everything. Everything is God. But they believe that everything in the universe is God. In this pantheistic universe, God, small g, was in the process of perfecting himself through a dynamic evolutionary God. Evolution. Let's finish this. Let's give him a chance. God was in the process of perfecting himself through a dynamic evolutionary process known as the dialectic. A constant, endless struggle between thesis and antithesis, which resolved into a synthesis. In other words, we've got an idea, you all have an idea, let's put the ideas together. Now we've got a new idea. They were both stupid, isn't the new one going to be stupid too? Oh, shut up, Ray. But let's keep going. This is fascinating how this became everybody's basis of thought. Even in the little colleges on the corner. Even I'll tell anybody, man, don't even come to me talking about what college you went to. I went to Catherine College. If it's got somebody's first name, it's not a college. Okay? Billy College. No. Where'd you go to school? I went to Billy College. Okay, fine. But you'll get my point when I get through this. Thesis and antithesis, which then resolved endless struggle between the thesis and antithesis, which then resolved into synthesis. This synthesis became the new thesis. Oh, you got to start over again? Oh yeah, it's constant. It goes on and on and on and on. Which then inevitably formed a new antithesis to continue the progressive struggle onward and upward toward perfection. Hegel also viewed the state as being God on earth. So, government is God on earth. The ultimate authority and law in man's lives, because it represented man's collective power. If it's man's collective power, when I call my congressman, why doesn't he call me back? Won't even talk about the fact that the one that I called at the time just got out of jail, but we won't go there. It is this belief in the state or government as a sort of divine authority that has caused most of our problems. Over time, disciples of Hegel have become leaders in most other colleges, and especially among Ivy League universities. You know the ones: Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, University of Chicago. Don't tell anybody. Keep it to yourself. Don't want to say it too loud. University of Chicago. The College of William and Mary. And principally in this modern age, Yale. Hegel's dialectic is the central belief system of all of these colleges, and especially those who have any connection to the skull and bones fraternity of Yale. And don't forget, this fraternity has produced most of America's captains of industry, and let's just use these three. These presidents that came from Yale: William Howard Taft, Gerald R. Ford, George H.W. Bush, William Jefferson Clinton, George W. Bush. Harvard. How many came from Harvard? Now y'all gonna get mad, but I don't care. John Quincy Adams. John Adams. Not necessarily in that order, father and son, but don't think that the Bushes were the only ones. This happened quite a bit. We won't even get into the bloodlines of the presidency because that's a little bit beyond our purview today. John Quincy Adams, John Adams, Rutherford B. Hayes, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And how did he wind up here? Wow, he flunked out of 2 schools. George W. Bush. And then there's one last name here that nobody wants to remember, but I'm going to say it loud because I know the guy. Barack Hussein Obama. All Harvard boys. College of William and Mary. Thomas Jefferson. James Monroe. John Tyler. Now, if you've got that many presidents from these universities who teach this, you gotta understand why we're in the problems we're in. Because they're teaching this Hegelian dialectic, and we're all forced to live through it. Now, Now you see why we seem to be locked in one direction. And it doesn't seem to be based anymore on the word of Elohim. But the members of these fraternities outside of the schools, from their various positions of authority, have been at the vanguard of the development of our corporate systems, educational systems, at all levels. However, as these new disciples find their way into grade and high schools around the country, they have, remember those little groups that used to go into the, what do they call it, the higher educated groups? They have different names for them, but they wind up as the greatest and the smartest in your grade schools, your high schools, and they wind up in Ivy League schools. They're pointed there from the beginning. There's a reason for this, to keep a certain, they want the smartest and the brightest to continually be fed to these schools. And everybody, I want to go to an Ivy League school. Have fun. Even to this day, you hear people, oh, so-and-so got accepted for Ivy League schools. They're going to be a part of the problem in about 15 years because they're not going to be taught how to think. They're going to be taught what to think. However, as I said, as these new disciples find their way into grade and high schools around the country, the older, more knowledgeable teachers lament the switching in how they teach them. They went from the more logical phonics into this look-say system where you could say what the word, just say it how it sounds. And they didn't go any further than that. Trying to streamline learning, and in the process confuse the students by overcomplicating the method by which the answer is derived. Add this in with all of this new Common Core curriculum, which is actually only a standard for all students to know the same things by a certain age or a certain grade, which isn't a bad thing. But the bad thing was, it came out under whose administration? We got a president in and now that anything that he even looked at, get rid of that. So Common Core got to go too. Nobody could tell you. It's almost like trying to get somebody to explain to you what Common Core is almost like trying to get a black person to explain to you how you get to the point where you are even eligible for, what is it? You know what I'm talking about. That idea that, you're a second-class citizen because you have this thing. Now you don't. But see, the thing is, when you try to get people to explain anything that they just knee-jerk hate, they can't do it. They can't give you a reason. They say, well, it came from the politicians. No, it didn't. There was a team of educators that put this core curriculum together. I'm not agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. I read the thing and it didn't make sense to me either. But they're trying to teach the kids according to it. But nothing else has worked. So we really don't know. But it's one of these things that you deal with honestly if you're honest. But if you're not being honest, it'll never happen. Affirmative action, you'll never get an answer from people as how do you come to that point. The timetables and all of that in terms of how to determine it, the only way to determine it is to come through college. So if you didn't go to college, you can't even become an affirmative action baby. So, but who are the people that are out on the streets screaming for affirmative action? Folks that have just barely made it out of college, out of high school. Fascinating thing, but it makes about as much sense to argue for affirmative action as it does to argue against Common Core, if you don't know what you're talking about. Same thing. But the program was developed by educators, but the confusion and hatred generated by it and other methods of teaching have resulted in many students graduating from high schools for different reasons and high schools as well as grade schools, and they come out barely able to read, having difficulty with basic math at their grade level. With this confusion of curriculum, many students have been left by the wayside, as many parents are barely able to conform well enough to fill in the gaps in their children's knowledge. Yet this was part of the overall plan of Elohim, that we were to learn at home. For all to become knowledgeable and able to move forward in all areas of life. Learning at home, in addition to what is taught in the schools, is the height of wisdom. Especially with the awful curriculum offerings that are being forced upon children now in many districts nationally. But learning at home as well as school as a systemic approach was the original intent. It was the plan of Elohim that all would get the basics of life, teach these things to their children, and all would be elevated in wisdom. Proverbs, the first chapter, the second verse. Proverbs, the first chapter, the second verse. To know wisdom and instruction, to recognize the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment and uprightness, to give sense to the simple, knowledge and judgment to the young man. The wise hears and increases learning, and understanding ones get wisdom. To understand the proverb and its meaning, the words of the wise and their acute sayings or riddles. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and forsake not the law of your mother, for they shall be an ornament of grace to your head, and chains around your neck. My son, if sinners lure you, do not be willing. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, and we will watch secretly for the innocent without cause, let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those who go down into the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Cast in your lot among us. In other words, come on along with us. Do what we do. And let us have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep back your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil and make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, and they lie in wait for their own blood. They watch secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who gains unjust gain. It takes away its owner's life. As I said before, there are nearly 400 scriptures advising us to learn from Elohim and his people. Yet Elohim is not the center of our educational system. As a consequence, our children become frustrated and the dropout rates are skyrocketing. Just as every job out here now requires more and more education and sharper computer skills just to eke out a living, much less to do well. And according to employers, many of the children who come out of high school with a diploma can barely read or spell. And the use of the English language is deplorable. Yet you've got idiots that saying they want to teach Ebonics. Please. Blank, please. Fill in the blank. Not to mention that many high school students of other countries graduate able to communicate, speaking and writing in more than one language, fluently. Therefore, it is of utmost importance that we remain vigilant in keeping up with the education of our children, meaning that we must keep up with those things that they are being brought into their consciousness so that we're aware as well as they are. It's a tragedy that we have a full-blown school system, yet half of the students have to resort to going to after-school tutoring at places like Sylvan Learning Centers and other private tutors just because of the imbalances in the school system from one neighborhood to another. We won't get into that either. We know where it comes from. But it's time to learn how to overcome it. Many Christian parents, because of this, are responding according to Scripture and fighting off the things that are in school now. You go to school now and you go to have what they call a sex education class. And what are they doing? They're teaching about homosexuality and transgender issues that go far beyond education and border on championing these issues. As a result, many parents have returned to homeschooling. And many of the homeschooling systems are based on Christian ideals and morals, but the true Bible-based training of children is best done at your home. Especially for we in the churches of God, because in this one area it's probably not good that God is not, it probably is a good thing that God isn't mentioned for many of us, because it would be a Sunday teaching. And all of the wrong, and I'm going to say wrong, let's say incorrect teaching that comes with that. We know that the training done would be based on Gnostic Sunday principles and concepts, and would have to be retrained or taught at home anyway, so why not just do it there? Or we would have to do it here in Sabbath classes in the churches. But even in the colleges and universities, we can see the results of these vain, immoral philosophies creeping onto all areas of collegiate study by the attitudes of the men and women coming in to the world from the Ivy League universities. And please understand what I'm saying. This isn't a blanket condemnation of upper education. There is education that is based upon sound principles. Yes, there is. Sound principles of mathematics. The laws of mathematics are quite simply applied as they are. There's not a whole lot that you can do. 1 + 1 will always be. 3 × 3 will always be. These things do not change. You can't add philosophies to that and say, well, we think that if you think this way. Somebody might say that, but you look at them like, and that should end that. You see, certain things are basic, and once they're learned, they're learned. Once learned, musical notes, scales, basic theory, the playing of instruments, and these basic disciplines do not change. Chemistry and the periodic chain table and formulas are static. They do not change. We may learn more and more effective formulas to make life work more effectively within chemistry, but the formulas don't change. They may become more complicated, they may be more useful, but they don't change. Nor can they be changed through philosophy. You can't change your philosophy and make your water run differently. You can't change the philosophy of how music is played. You can have a theory of how to do it, but you're going to use the same notes. Even those who didn't want to learn how to play music had to learn something they call tablature. It's still a static thing. Tablature has not changed since it came into the mix. So either way you're going to learn how to read something, so why not learn how to read music? Because the learning tablature is basically the same. It's different. It's a different form, but it still doesn't change. You still have to learn something to do it. So learn it. But you see, the natural laws of physics are as binding as the laws of God. No one has yet found a new philosophy or a new law of gravity. What goes up, no matter how much propulsion you put on it, eventually it's got to come back down. Just as with the law of God, if you try to break the laws of physics, they will break you. Don't believe it? Go up 50 floors in a building. Jump out. And on the way down, wax philosophical on your new theory on how to change the law of gravity, allowing you to fly. Now you better hurry, because before you know it, oops. Oops. The disciplines of mathematics, science, biology, computer science, music, all these things have moved on with little problem for years because they don't change. They're solid, they're static, they work. I remember when I started, everybody was saying, you'll never make a living as a musician. Things keep going the way they are, they'll be the only ones that will be making a living. The problems, however, have come in law, law, accounting, medicine, and general education, where theories and philosophies rule. Paul, way back in his day, warned Timothy of the theories of antithesis and bending of biblical knowledge with theories. For those who think that it just started in the last 20 or 30 years or so. No. It goes all the way back to Paul and before. 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter, the 18th verse. 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter, the 18th verse, where it says that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to share, to be generous, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. O Timothy, guard the deposit. Avoid profane and vain babblings and oppositions of falsely named science, or you might have science falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. In other words, they've fallen away from the faith following these things. Grace be with you. Science, falsely so called. The phrase reads a little bit differently in the Greek when you translate it to English. And in all honesty, this seemed to be one of King James's little punches at science, where they didn't like science too much, so they were going to attack science. The word didn't have anything to do with science. It's not speaking about science at all. Notice the correct rendering. For those who are studying, it'll be in complete Greek. G5442, G3872, G1624, G952, G2757, G2534, G. Fulaso, poraketeke, eptrepo, betelos, kinofnia, kai, antithesis, gnosis, pseudonymous. Put in English, guard the deposit. Avoid profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. Now, the crux of this phrase is this pseudonymous gnosis. Gnosis of false knowledge, or teaching false knowledge. Knowledge unproven by the maker of all things. He is the Almighty. Knowledge which goes against the maker of all things. Knowledge that has turned the workmanship of the maker on its ear. The Bible is plain in its declaration that there are different punishments for different crimes or sin. If you go to Exodus 23, all punishments of theft or loss were inclusive of restitution of the lost or stolen items to the victim by the perpetrator. If you observe criminal justice in today's world, the sociological model gives 4 reasons for incarceration of an offender. You see, they weren't even talking about science. That's why they flipped from one into the other. He wasn't even talking about science. He was talking about false teaching. And that's what this is. Look what modern incarceration says. And this is the sociological model that gives 4 reasons for putting somebody in jail. Number 1, incapacitation, taking them off the streets. Number 2, deterrence. If he's in prison, he can't do it again, not out there. Anybody that's been in prison knows you can do a lot in there. Sometimes as much as you do on the street. 3, rehabilitation. Education programs must have been cut because it seems to have really been stopped. So what happens that the men and women that are put in jail are allowed to hang out with other inmates unless they're in solitary, but sometimes that's a way to keep them from doing that. But the ones that hang out, they hang out with the other inmates, rejoin the gangs, learn how to correct the mistakes that got them caught in the first place, and that's why they call it crime school. While we're talking about education, might as well talk about crime school too. It's real. That they get out there, hang out with the folks that did what they did, learn how to not get caught. The last one, number 4, retribution. A sense of payment for the crime. Progressives and liberals dismiss the authority of government and they say that no, that's not retribution, that's revenge. Not according to the Bible, it's not. If he put you in charge, then done. I'm not saying that everybody that does anything is right. The shootings, for instance, and that's dead wrong. And then I believe somebody is eventually going to pay for that on the next coil, not just on this one. But nowhere in this scenario is any compassion or any avenue of restitution to the victim for what was lost to them. Now, for those who think that this new system makes sense, it makes sense to the folks that are making money from it. Because you see, there's little in the way of rehabilitation in modern prisons, government or private. And we find that most criminals in this system become repeat offenders. Why? because the society continues to penalize the criminal by denying him any true ability to secure gainful employment if he or she has a prison record. And anybody who wants to consider working in some fast food place before the law, I think the law within the month changes it up to $11 an hour, and try to buy a house at $11 an hour. Thank you very much. Oh, that's enough. They don't need no more than that. Well, when you say they, say I, and put yourself in their shoes. And you might think a little bit differently about that. But you see, the traps are there, and they are illogical, because they trap the offender in a life of crime and keep confusion in the world as more and more crimes are committed and more men and women are trapped in this vicious cycle. The sociological model is wrong, and it will be a welcome change when Yeshua returns to revert us to and reteach the Exodus model. There's some things in that Exodus model that people won't like, though. First of all, if we can get 3 good witnesses to prove that you killed him, guess what? We're gonna kill you. That's just law. If you stole from somebody, you have to work to give it back to them. Real simple stuff here. Should have never gotten away from it. But we thought we outthought God. You didn't. You just made a horrible place to live for yourselves. There are many things in Exodus 23, if you go through, if these things were done now, people would go to prison, come out. I watched the guys yesterday. It was fascinating. They were going to let O.J. Simpson out of jail for, I think he will get out now on October 9th. And they were asking people, should he go? Oh, he should be in there for the rest of his life. What they were saying he should have been in there for the rest of his life for, the judge and 12 jurors decided he didn't do it. But the world decided he did, so the reason he got caught this time, he called the police and said, I want to go get my stuff back. And they said, we don't deal with criminals. You deal with it. So he wound up doing the time because the Las Vegas police didn't do their job. And now he comes out yesterday and everybody, no, leave him in there. I love people that are so intelligent that they can't see the difference between, you can't say the courts are always right at one time and then turn around and say they're always wrong on something else. You can't say that the courts are all, because like, hey, the police are part of the courts too. Are they always right every time they shoot somebody just because? Hello? You gotta do it right. But anyone who has been to prison, I guarantee you, somebody has read you this scripture. Let's go to Psalms, the 77th chapter, the 8th verse. Psalms, the 77th chapter, the 8th verse. In his mercy, is his mercy clean gone forever? Does his promise fail forevermore? Has Yahweh forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his tender mercies? And I said, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of Yahweh. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. I will meditate also on all your work and talk of your doings. Your way, Yahweh, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great as Elohim? Yes, God's way of justice is found in his sanctuary. And from what I'm seeing, nowhere else in that amazing a form. Anyone who lives in this country knows that once you slip up, there's little, if any, forgiveness by this world. Even if you're innocent, as far as the world is concerned, you did something. Unless, of course, you're a corporate titan and they steal millions and get golden parachutes and everything is all right. Now, well, he's too big to fail. And that's from the government itself. Sometimes, even if you are acquitted, that's not enough. But you see, that is not the way of God. So if that's not the way of God, whose way is it? That whole concept of never forgiving anyone for anything. Who is the accuser? He did this, he did that. But he repented. Yeah, but he did it. That is not God's way. That is Satan's way. God is forgiving, full of grace and mercy. But you can see who is running this world by the way things are done right now. In Matthew 7:16, Yeshua said, "By their fruits you shall know them." The world is spouting the fruit of a poisoned tree. A tree poisoned by Satan the devil. Medicine has gone completely away from finding the source of an illness. And they'll either give you drugs to mask the symptoms or remove the offending organ, with no regard to how the rest of the body will function without that organ. Can I get a witness? I've asked several doctors, and only one has had one course in nutrition since pre-med. So obviously they're not interested in you eating your way to wellness. Although with all the junk that's out here right now, that also is a little bit of a challenge. But they've not had any courses in nutrition since they were in pre-med. Yet the pharmaceutical labs have virtually taken over the medical industry. And it is now not a medical industry, but a commercial industry. It's all about the money. There's a drug for every malady known to man with side effects, which in many cases mirror the illness you're taking the drug to relieve. So if you're taking the drug and you feel the same way, how do you know you're well? You really don't. You feel the same no matter what. And you turn on your television, and your television almost feel like you standing out there in front of Pookie on the corner. Hey man, I got that stuff. Got that stuff. Got that drug. Every 15 minutes, they're selling a different drug on the television. And they got 1 million side effects under the bottom in small print. And the first thing they say, ask your doctor if you should take. If I have to ask my doctor what I should be taking, maybe, just maybe, I've got the wrong doctor. I'm just serious. I'm just serious. Of course, with all of the contraindications and illnesses and death caused by the drugs themselves, many are trying to go back to holistic and natural cures and herbal medicines, but the government is quietly trying to shut them down, trying to make nearly every natural cure either illegal or impossible to obtain. And most of the practitioners are being shut down, and over 60 of them have died mysteriously over the last 5 years. All I said, make one misstep and there you go. They're taking you away. But all kinds of people die from the drugs, but they keep selling them. And you have no idea how bad things are. We really don't. But sometimes you need to look at some numbers to understand what's happening. The medical profession acts as if what it's doing is normal. The American Hospital Association puts out stats every year. These are the ones from 2016. And you'll understand why your newspaper, your obituary section is thicker than the newspaper itself. In 2016, 5,564 reporting hospitals reported that 1,677 people were hospitalized every day in 2016. Went out there on their website last night, and as of midnight, it may be more by now, because it flipped a couple of times while I was looking at it. These are live death counts as of midnight last night for the 5 biggest causes of death in the United States this year. Number 1 cause of death in America this year? Abortion. 604,240 killed here. If you want to put up a thing like McDonald's, never mind. 604,240 deaths by abortion last year. 339,936 deaths from heart disease. 327,404 deaths from cancer. 193,665 directly from smoking cigarettes. This one got me. 169,880 deaths from obesity, just being too big. Now you add in all of the other causes, which were too many to list. Total deaths this year so far, 2017, 1,920,849. This is July. Last year's numbers were 1,635,125. So we're already 7 months in past the total for last year. And nobody sees a problem with that? Nobody sees a problem with that? U.S. health is getting worse by the day. And it's as if no one cares so long as the industry is making money off of it. Cancer became a $1 trillion industry last year. That's what was made off of it, $1 trillion. There's just something wrong when profits are more important than cure. Can't let the lawyers off. The legal arm of the criminal justice system is no better. They're more interested in putting people in jail for the slightest little thing. You got your red light cameras all over the place. I love what happened yesterday. They slapped them in the face. They had to. But what's fascinating, they got to give money back, but they hadn't said anything about putting the cameras down. They haven't said anything about that. That's really what Wallace wanted, to have the cameras taken down. He wasn't interested in the money, but they figured we'll throw in the money, he'll sit down and shut up. Hopefully he won't. Mark, please don't. Keep going until they take them down. Because a lot of people got put in jail, not because they did something wrong, but they couldn't pay the fines. Something wrong with that. But the whole system is no better. Defense attorneys no longer even ask. Remember when you used to watch, if anybody remembers Perry Mason, first thing he would have to want to know is, did you do it? I want to know what I'm dealing with here. I don't deal with you, but I just need to know what I'm dealing with. They don't even ask now. They don't care if a client is guilty or innocent. They simply proceed with the case, and may the best liar win. And the entire defense strategy is based on Satan's antagonistic argument with Yahweh concerning Job. Skin for skin. Skin for skin. Oh, what's he talking about? Let's go to Job, the 2nd chapter, the 1st verse. Job, 2nd chapter, 1st verse. And there was a day when the sons of Elohim came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan came along with them to present himself before Yahweh. And Yahweh said unto Satan, where did you come from? And Satan answered Yahweh and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And Yahweh said unto Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, and one that fears Yahweh and has departed from evil, and he still retains his perfection. Although you did incite me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered Yahweh and said, skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give for his life. Put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and you shall see if he does not blaspheme you to your face. And Yahweh said unto Satan, behold, he is in your hand, but preserve his life. So Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto the crown of his head. When you really boil it down to the metal, this is the essence of case law. When they go in court, first thing they do, well, you got to let us do that because according to so-and-so versus Johnson versus Johnson in 1834, you all let them do this, so you got to let us do it too. Skin for skin. Skin for skin. You let them do it last time. Now you have to let me do it this time. This was how you all ruled against them, so you got to rule for us the same way. Children make this same selfish argument on a daily basis with their parents. Put simply, case law is the resort of lawyers going into court with rulings from prior cases brought before any court in the land, claiming that their case must be ruled as this case was. Case law. That's what our courts are based on. The entire case is adjudicated upon this precedent. These arguments can take hours. And the whole process is completely legal. And horrible decisions can be made as a result. But you see, in Satan's system, this is fair law. Most of these sketchy means of dealing with law and justice and medicine and many of these other disciplines which have been co-opted into Satan's philosophy of the world, and the world has been blinded to any alternative to these methods because God and his word have been taken completely out of the process. There are people walking around in this age that have never set foot in a church, so they've never heard these things. Or when they do hear it, they're being talked against. The Bible contradicts itself. You can't listen to that. Oh, well, this one says something different. They may agree in the aggregate, but because it's worded just a little bit differently, oh, they contradict each other. You can't listen to that. These people have no religious upbringing at all, and many go through their whole lives sure that their educations have completely prepared them for anything that could possibly come at them. But it's a different world than we have been taught in from the perspective of the Word of God. Isaiah, even in his day, saw this day coming. Even from his vantage, he knew what was coming. Why? Because in all this education and wealth and all these things and all of this stuff that we have amassed, the word of Elohim shows us that we haven't changed a bit. Not a bit. Isaiah, the 59th chapter, the first verse. Behold, the hand of Yahweh is not shortened from saving, nor is his ear heavy from hearing. But your iniquities are coming between you and your God. And your sins have hidden his face from you, from hearing. For your hands are defiled by blood. Yea, your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken falsehood. Your tongue murmurs perverseness. No one calls for righteousness. Oh, they want revenge, not righteousness. And no one pleads with truth, trusting emptiness and speaking vanity. They conceive mischief and give birth to iniquity. They hatch adder's eggs and weave the spider's web. He who eats their eggs dies. And that which is crushed hatches out a viper. In other words, you just go from one bad to the next. Their webs shall not become clothing, nor shall they cover themselves with their works. Their works are works of evil, and the acts of violence are in their hands. Their feet run to evil, and they hurry to pour out innocent blood. They do not know the way of peace, and no justice is in their tracks. They have made crooked paths for themselves. Everyone going in them does not know peace. For this reason, justice is far from us. Righteousness does not overtake us. We wait for light, but behold, dimness. We look for brightness, but we walk in gloom. We grope for the wall like the blind, and we grope as if we had no eyes. We stumble at noonday as in twilight, in deserted places like one's dying. We all of us roar like bears, and we moan like doves. We look for justice, but there is none. For salvation, but it is far from us. For our rebellions are multiplied before you, and our sins testify against us. For our transgressions are with us, and we know our iniquities, transgressing and lying against Yahweh and backsliding from our God, speaking oppression and revolt. That's all you hear now. Everything happens. Nobody says, man, we should reform the system. They say, no, let's go out in the streets. Let's protest. Let's go bust something up. Let's go break out windows. That's going to solve the problem. Speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and murmuring words of falsehood from the heart. In other words, you believe it. It's from the heart. You believe you're right, but you're not. And justice is driven back, and righteousness stands afar off. For truth stumbles in the plaza, and right is not able to enter. And the truth is lacking, and whoever turns from evil makes himself a prey. I'm going to put my gun away, and I'm going to not do. Next night, somebody's breaking in your house. They ain't got no gun. Let's go get them. That's how it is. And Yahweh saw And it was evil in his eyes, that there was no justice. And he saw that there was no man, and he was astonished that there was no intercessor. No one could come forward and be fair and ask people to do the right thing, because everybody had evil in their hearts. And his own arm saved for him. In other words, he knows he's going to have to do it all in the end, so he's already just letting you know that. And his righteousness sustained him, for he put on righteousness like armor, and a helmet of salvation on his head, and he put on robes of vengeance as clothing, and he put on zeal like a mantle, according to works, so he will repay. Fury to his foes, recompense to his foes. He will repay recompense to the coasts. So they shall fear Yahweh's name from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, as we know that's the east. When the foe comes like a flood, the Spirit of Yahweh shall cause him to flee. And the Redeemer comes to Zion. And to those in Jacob who turn back from their rebellion, declares Yahweh, as for me, this is my covenant with them, says Yahweh. My spirit who is on you, and my words which I have put in your mouth shall not depart out of your mouth, or out of the mouth of your seed. In other words, this is what he's saying. If we teach these things properly, not only will we do it, but we will teach our children to do the same. This is a push toward education as well. Put in your mouth shall not depart out of your mouth, or out of the mouth of your seed, or out of the mouth of your seed's seed. You see what's happening here? Teaching, moving it forward to the next generation.
Oh, I can't make my kids go to church. I can't fake them. I mean,
that's the point. That's the whole idea of giving it to you. That if you die and leave them here, you've left them with something to learn from and move forward. From now on and forever, says Yahweh. We are in a world that groans for the return of Messiah. We're trapped in it. And the only true way out is his return. You waiting for God? Last night, guy was laughing. Y'all believe that stuff? Y'all some stupid blah. We have gone so far off that there seems to be no way back to the right path as a people. Hate is on the rise. Violence is on the rise. Even people who seemed calm and reserved sound like murderers once the camera trains on them. I heard a guy in Florida. The guy was telling them, hey, what you're saying is wrong. You know, why you all aren't doing anything right?
You got your black president. That was your reparations right there. If you don't like this country, go back to Africa.
And I'm thinking, what a fool. Don't you know we were born here? The hate is just everywhere. It's ridiculous. It's everywhere. Satan has ensured that all of our institutions are shot through with evil and are hardwired to miseducate and convince us that each synthesis is the final answer to the previous thesis and antithesis. And it just goes on and on and on. They say eventually it'll become perfect. I don't think so. Need just be more stuff. That's why we got to do, everything's got to change. Already did. It should change. It changed again. The only thing should change that much is your underwear. There should be something logical that says it makes sense. And this book is it. whether people want to admit it or not. Each time you go and cycle through again and again and again and again and again and again, oh, there's something wrong. We got to refix this. Same thing over and over and over again, and nothing ever gets better. That should tell you who it is that they want to keep doing it. What is the textbook definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and thinking you're going to get a different result. Yet, someone always comes up with another new way to keep the same nonsense going and then profit from it. As Yeshua tells us in John 10:10, the thief, Satan, comes but to steal, kill, and destroy. Messiah will come that he may have life and have it, and we have it more abundantly. Many who doubt his coming will see how much better God's way is than this round robin of evil that we're surrounded by right now. Let us pray, fast, read, and tune out the nonsense of this world, because it's going to be coming hot and heavy. Why? Because we continue to go along with Satan's dialectic, D-I-E, electic. For if we return and remain true to the path that God set before us, we will make it into his kingdom, no matter what comes our way, because at some point we will reach that point where we realize that there is nothing else to hang on to. And we will hang on to his word, we will hang on to his promise, we will somehow hang on to each other, and we will make it through this into his kingdom. Next week, Matrix 5, the matrix of information. God bless you all.